everyone! Today I want to talk about crocs. No, not you. I'm talking about the ones who looked at the land, looked at the sea, and then made the absolute worst decision for beach safety. Instead of lounging around in marshes like their swamp puppy cousins, these guys decided that all that land stuff, aka walking, was way overrated. And so, they swapped their stubby little legs for long flat flippers and developed long streamlined bodies for flowing through the water. Think of them as submarines with teeth. But hold on, how do we know these are actually crocs and not just bootleg versions of a mosasaur or something? That's a great question. I guess at some point, we should probably talk about what makes a croc a croc. But for now, despite their fins and fishy lifestyle vibes, these oceanic terrors were still considered crocs. That said, it wasn't always this obvious. Like most things in paleontology, the first few fossils we found were met with a healthy mix of confusion and, what the heck is this? In fact, it's only been in recent years that we've realized just how wonderfully weird and diverse the crocodilian family tree really is. So today, we're taking a look at the crocs who returned to the sea and discovering the forgotten chapter of crocodilian evolution. Don't forget to hit that like button, and let's dive into this. Okay, so what actually makes a croc a croc? Like, when does a scaly carnivore go from just another toothy reptile to certified chomp machine? In my previous video, we talked about how modern crocs, aka the ones currently loitering around in swamps and ruining a gazelle's day, branched off around 90 million years ago. But the ones we're talking about today, they're part of a larger group called crocodile forms, which is sciencey speak for stuff that looks like a croc but isn't quite ready for prime time. For example, take a look at our friends from earlier, who, thanks to their armored skin and whole walking thing, still looked the part. Or at least, close enough. But then we have these weirdos. Seriously, what is this? One of them looks like a scary canoe with teeth, the other's halfway through evolving into a fish, and the third is basically a horror-themed torpedo. And yet somehow they still get invited to the croc party? Why? Because, despite looking like they lost a bet with evolution, they still check off all the crocodilian boxes. It turns out our new friends here have a few physical features that are uniquely crocodilian. So, even though they showed up with flippers, we still let them into the club. Anyways, what sort of features are we talking about? Well, it all starts with their noggins. If we compare the skull of one of these sea crocs to something like, say, a mosasaur, they do look pretty similar. But what if I were to tell you, it's just because I drew it that way? If we add a little more detail, we can see that the crocs have something that the marine reptiles don't. A bony wall that separates their nose from their mouth. This is called a secondary palate, and it basically reroutes the airflow so they can breathe even while holding something in their mouth, which is incredibly useful when your entire life strategy is bite first and never let go. And, strangely enough, you humans have one of these too. But while yours is a mixture of bones and soft tissue, in crocs, it's all bone, baby. This feature is completely missing in the other marine reptiles such as Mosasaurus, Ichthyosaurus, and even Plesiosaurs. When they breathe, air goes through the nostrils and then into the mouth before moving on into the lungs. But with crocs, that bony palate reroutes the airflow and lets them breathe even when their mouths are, say, occupied. Now let's talk about the ankles. And yes, we're talking about ankles in a video about sea crocs, but stay with me. Crocodile forms have a special ankle joint called the cruotarsal joint. Basically, it's an upgrade that lets them twist and rotate their feet more effectively. Super useful when you're walking on land and need a pivot like a prehistoric ballerina. And while our ocean-going friends didn't exactly need it anymore, they still had it. Sort of like having an evolutionary souvenir back when they did more walking and less dolphin cosplay. But most importantly, it's a feature that none of the other marine reptiles bothered to evolve. So yeah, even though these sea crocs wandered a little off the evolutionary path and showed up looking like Mother Nature said, just hit send, deep down, they're still very much uniquely croc. Just, you know, with a few performance enhancements. But now that we have our croc criteria locked in, let's meet our new friends, starting with the big guy himself, Machimosaurus. Now, I won't lie to you all, out of the three crocs we're covering today, Machimosaurus is by far the least seaworthy. If the other two were deep-sea high-tech cruise ships, Machimosaurus was more like a coastal tugboat with dreams. That said, compared to your average croc, Machimosaurus was basically Poseidon. It had a long barrel-chested body for moving through the water, a long powerful tail for propulsion, and a strong skull built for crushing. Then there's the teeth, which were thick, round, and perfect for cracking open those tasty oceanic pistachios. But do you want to know what the real giveaway was? The ultimate clue that Machimosaurus was a coastal regular and didn't just crash there on weekends? It's not just the body plan, no. The best way to tell if a prehistoric animal spent a lot of time in the ocean is if you find them in the ocean. Well, more accurately, what used to be the ocean. In the case of Machimosaurus, we found their fossils all along the prehistoric coastlines of Europe and North Africa. So yeah, it turns out where you find an animal is a pretty strong clue that they might have also lived there. Shocking, I know. Now, Machimosaurus wasn't exactly graceful. It didn't glide through the water like some kind of sleek oceanic assassin. It was more like a floating brick with a bite force. But what it lacked in elegance, it made up for in sheer size. This thing was massive, over 9 meters in length, or for those of you like me who measure things in bald eagles, 30 feet. In fact, it's one of the largest crocodile forms ever discovered. So while our friend wasn't winning any swim meets, Machimosaurus was still a major evolutionary milestone, a chunky prototype on its way from land-lurking swamp puppy to full-on Leviathan nightmare. But while Machimosaurus was big, bitey, and only mildly committed to the sea, our next croc ditched the legs for flippers and went full-on reptilian torpedo. Let me introduce you to Metriorhynchus, the croc that looked at the ocean and said, "I live here now." Right off the bat, you can probably tell that Metriorhynchus wasn't messing around. Out of all the crocs on our list, this one was the most fully committed to ocean life. Like, aggressively so. It's basically the evolutionary equivalent of someone who goes on one beach vacation and comes back with a surfboard and a whole new identity. Like Machimosaurus, Metriorhynchus was discovered back in the 1800s, hanging out in what used to be the Jurassic seas of modern Europe. And while a skeleton technically said crocodile, everything else about it screamed, this thing definitely hasn't touched land in a while. It had flippers instead of legs, no armor, and a body shaped like it eats prey at 40 knots. Unlike Machimosaurus, who casually dipped its toes in the water, Metriorhynchus dove in headfirst and filed for marine citizenship. Its limbs were fully converted into flippers, its body was long and streamlined, and it had a crescent-shaped vertical tail fin similar to what we see on sharks. Put simply, this wasn't just a croc who liked to swim. This was a croc who probably only swam. In addition to copying all that fish stuff, Metriorhynchus also started to ditch some of its croc lineage. That thick armored skin you see on modern crocs? Gone. Why? Because armor is great when you're dragging yourself through a swamp, but when you're chasing squid through open water, the last thing you need is to be dragging around prehistoric chainmail. So Metriorhynchus ditched the scales, embraced hydrodynamics, and never looked back. Now, these adaptations didn't just stop at the body. Its skull was long and narrow and perfect for gliding through the water. However, now we have a problem. While the narrow snout was perfect for cruising along through the water, it was terrible for crushing anything with a hard shell. Meaning, all those delicious hard shell sea snacks were off the menu. But not to worry, because Metriorhynchus had a different game plan. Needle-like teeth, perfect for grabbing soft-bodied prey like fish and squid. Or anything else that thought it was safe to be slippery. Basically, think of Metriorhynchus as a missile with teeth. Point, launch, and devour. But of course now, we have a whole new problem. You see, living in saltwater sucks. Literally, because all that extra salt needs to get sucked out of the body through a process known as osmosis. Now, for most reptiles, this is a pretty big issue. But Metriorhynchus wasn't like most reptiles. Our boy was an overachiever, and thankfully over time it evolved massive saw glands that helped him filter out that yucky brine. That's cool, Napkin. But how do we know this? It's not like we found a fossilized croc blowing his nose. That's true, but thankfully if you stare at fossils long enough, you start to learn a few things. And if you're a smart cookie, some of those things are actually useful. It turns out we can look at modern animals with saw glands such as sea turtles and iguanas and identify the grooves and openings within the skull where these glands would have connected. Then it's just a matter of checking the fossils for the same grooves and voila! Thanks to fossilized plumbing, we can see just how impressive this animal truly was. Between the flippers, the tail fin, the streamlined body, and built-in saltwater filtration plant, Metriorhynchus was the real deal. And yet, despite all those upgrades, it was still unmistakably a croc. It still had that classic secondary palate, those distinctly crocodilian skull bones, and yes, even those weird little ankle joints, just in case it ever remembered what walking was. Now, our friend here wasn't alone. The oceans were filled with massive marine reptiles who terrorized the Jurassic waters. Oh hey look, it's our friend Pliosaurus Funky, better known as Predator X. But don't worry, even though this guy's a giant, if our previous croc was any indication, I have a feeling that Metriorhynchus would have been able to hold his own just fine. Oh, I see. What the heck is this? How is this thing supposed to be the T-Rex of the deep if he's so tiny? Actually, that croc isn't the T-Rex of the deep. That honor goes to our next croc, Dacosaurus. Heck yeah, let's go, bring him on out. Seriously? This thing's almost as puny as the last one. Don't worry, looks can be deceiving. Dacosaurus was an absolute monster and one of the coolest animals ever to explore the Mesozoic Sea. Dacosaurus was first described back in the days when scientific classification was basically, close enough. And true to 19th century fashion, when scientists found the skull, they assumed that it belonged to a theropod dinosaur. Because you know, short snout, serrated teeth, general aura of violence, clearly that's a land-based murder lizard, right? But nope, it turns out that Dacosaurus wasn't stomping through the forest. Instead, it was gliding through the ocean. Our boy was a croc, and he was an incredibly strange croc at that. Despite being related to our sleek torpedo from earlier, Dacosaurus looked like he was designed specifically for starting problems on purpose. Instead of the long streamlined snout that most marine crocs had, Dacosaurus had a short and powerful skull built for tearing off large pieces of flesh. None of those dainty fish snaggling teeth here. These teeth were thick, curved, and serrated, built for serious damage. Suddenly the theropod confusion makes a little more sense. So while Metriorhynchus darted after its prey with speed and precision, Dacosaurus was more of the ambushing bruiser type. It would show up, take a chunk out of something large, and then let nature do the rest. Talk about a deep-sea mugging. Now, Dacosaurus still had flippers and a tail fin, but its build was shorter and stockier compared to its cousins. Less sea missile and more aquatic bear trap. It wasn't chasing its prey over long distances. Instead, our boy was doing mafia-style drive-bys, sneaking up on the other medium-sized marine reptiles and taking out a good chunk. So while many of the other sea crocs were built for speed and finesse, Dacosaurus came preloaded with Allosaur-style teeth, a jaw like a hydraulic press, and a tail that could launch it like a cannonball. In a sea full of slicers and slashers, it was the bruiser. And sometimes, brute force wins. And thankfully, because none of these guys overlapped with our friend, it meant that even despite its size, Dacosaurus earns the name T-Rex of the deep. But sadly, even bruisers can go extinct. Like many other marine crocs, Dacosaurus vanished by the end of the late Cretaceous period. And no, it wasn't the asteroid. That lovely party was still a few million years away. By this time, our planet's oceans were changing, and fast. The sea level shifted and the climate started to change. But most importantly, these guys showed up. They were bigger, faster, more flexible, and armed with advanced sensory equipment. Basically, the pro version of marine predators. Which, if your hunting strategy is basically bite first, you might run into a few issues when your contemporaries are basically you 2.0. By the time animals like Mosasaur took over the role as top predator, Dakosaurus was already history. A strange, powerful relic of a croc lineage that rolled the dice on becoming a sea monster, but sadly fell just short of kaiju status. However, before Dakosaurus took its final blow in the fossil record, it left behind one last mystery. What's the deal with its babies? Okay, here's where things get a little speculative. You see, we don't have a lot of evidence of how marine crocs gave birth. Unlike Ichthyosaurs, who were basically the rabbits of the sea, we don't have any fossilized remains of sea crocs giving birth, let alone one that's pregnant. So does this mean that these guys were scurrying up on land and laying eggs in the sand like sea turtles? Well, maybe. After all, they still have those crocodilian-style ankles, which theoretically could have helped them prop themselves up enough to walk on land. But also, as you can probably imagine, flippers and gravity, not exactly the dream team, which then leads us to think that maybe these sea-venturing crocs gave live birth. And personally, this is where I find myself on this debate. I mean, it does sort of solve the whole issue of how do I not die while struggling on land. However, as you can imagine, there's still some issues with this as well. Live birth really isn't a thing for crocs, and the other marine crocs who gave live birth developed wider pelvises to make the whole process of pushing out a tiny torpedo of joy a little smoother. But from the limited remains we have of sea crocs, they all seem to have relatively narrow pelvises by comparison. Ouch. And so, we're left with a question that still stumps scientists. Did marine crocs give birth in the ocean? Or did they drag themselves on land and suffer through it? Honestly, I'd love to hear what you all think, so feel free to drop your croc-related theories in the comments. Because either way, it seems like sea crocs hit an evolutionary wall. As the oceans changed and new predators rose up, crocs just couldn't keep up, especially in the baby-making department. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the sea, another group of predators was embarking on a new adventure of experiments and wonder. And unlike sea crocs, these guys are still here. I'm of course talking about sharks. Some of their reproductive strategies are wild, and it's one of the reasons why they become one of our planet's most enduring predators. But unfortunately, we're out of time, so I guess we'll have to leave the incredible story of shark babies for another video. Until then, I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to bring snacks.